Is there a question from the audience? If not, I'm going to take a prerogative first. It seems to me that there's a 3M thing operating here around modelling, measurement, and got to get my third one, around monitoring. Monitoring, measurement, and modelling. And it seems to me that some of the data and some of the models still need a mountain of work. So I think, Richard, you pointed out some quite serious issues. Raphael, you pointed some serious issues. What is it that needs to be done to actually take us to a robust platform that growers can use going forward with confidence?
I'll take it for soil if you like. Yeah. Data. We need to actually go out and start measuring carbon projects. Really, we have the technologies for measuring. We've got models coming out of our ears, but we don't have the data to parameterize these models.
Sorry, the gentleman over there. You were first. No, you were first.
John Hassel. Given that all of the energy production for electricity and all of the energy for transportation comes from fossil fuel, and given that methane comes from grass, which is not fossil fuel, and that methane only lasts 10 to 12 years in the atmosphere, well, can you explain how that can be that we can keep on assuming that methane is building up consecutively from year after year after year and not a fixed and finite amount? And if what I'm saying is correct, haven't our successive federal governments, not state ones, sold us out as a country and as farmers by taking it as building up forever and ever rather than just being a finite amount?
In my limited capacity of understanding these things, I'm sure there are further in the room, but with methane, as I understand it, methane is short-lived, as you say, and it degrades, but it is extremely high warming potential. So what they do is they average it out over the 100 years, and that gets us 28. It's much higher than that, whereas with CO2, any molecule of CO2 that's produced, it stays, it's got the same warming potential, but it's there for good. And there is a lot of work on the global warming potential STAR methodology, which is about trying to look at, well, if you're actually reducing methane emissions, then you're actually having a bigger impact on lowering emissions than if you're increasing methane emissions, because that instant warming effect, that extremely high but instant warming effect of methane compared to carbon dioxide. So it is a juggling act. It's all about the numbers, how you balance it out. But there may be someone who has more detail than that.
No, but they take into account that it breaks down.
Yes.
They average it out.
Yeah, average it out.
Right. Minister?
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Raphael, for your presentation. There has been data collected on soil carbon, and the advice that I had been consistently getting was that the ability to accumulate soil carbon in low rainfall areas was very minimal. Now, there does, and I know your argument is, yeah, it might not be great in terms of percentage, but because you can do this so extensively, then it's potentially worth doing. Have you, and there is some contest about the data that we've been relying on. So what would be, how do we go about, getting a very concerted program of reliable data that farmers can use on this, in this, what seems to me to be quite a contested area?
Thanks. I think the federal government's finally got an answer for that. But I think it's setting up monitoring networks where you can actually have locations where you can go and get repeated measurements over time. That's what's lacking, I think, and that's what we need for a lot of our modelling. There is a fair amount of data out there that's single time point data. We have the SCARP data, the program in 2012, I think, that collected a lot of soil carbon data from 0 to 30 centimeters across agricultural Australia. So all of that data is used to, and is useful because we can use that data to derive the sort of surfaces and the maps and the things that we've got, but we actually don't have any temporal data. We don't have any data that's collected at the same locations over time, which is what we need to make these assessments of how much we've lost or how much we're losing or how much potentially we can gain back. We can do this through modelling, and we are doing this through modelling, trying to sort of make the best use of the data that we have, but it's like squeezing a dry sponge almost. You know, we've done all we can with the data that we have. So there.
Yeah, can I add to that the data and the modelling requirement from the likes of the regen farmers, Haggerty, Phil Logue, Stuart McAlpine, who are all in the room and all have data over a number of years, but there isn't the data going out to the broader audience. There isn't the understanding there, and this for me is as a consultant, is one of the bigger issues, is understanding the changes that you say you're getting on your farm and how you're getting them. What management changes have you made? What increases are you getting over what time? What cost impact is that having? And what profitability are we going to get out of it? And what emissions are we reducing? That was what Raphael was saying, was that point data over a long period of time. We've got that with all the physical stuff. We know the yields, we know phosphorus levels, we know potassium levels, we know rainfall. We've got all that on an individual farm basis over a long period of time. But some of this carbon emission stuff we don't have on that point data.
It's also about the measurement. These are, to get data you need to measure. And perhaps one of the issues has been that collecting soil data is really hard. It's expensive. But now we have measurement technologies that can help us do that in a standardized way, in a fairly cost-efficient manner. We've been working on, and in particular, these spectroscopic methods. We've been working on these methods for the last 30, 40 years, right? It's about time we actually get them into practice. And we are getting them into practice, but it's slow. So we need to develop those tools to help us get all of this data in a cost-efficient manner. And it's not just data on carbon, because I think we should be collecting data on the different types of carbon, because that's absolutely informative for anything that you want to do with soil health, climate change mitigation, and the like. And these methods can help you get those.
So when you do your testing, you can tell which of those three types it is?
Yeah, it's a method that is based on optical reflectance of light, emitting some infrared light into the soil, and what reflects back tells you the composition of the minerals and the organics in the soil. You need to do a bit of modeling, which is why it's complex, but yes, fairly much instantaneously you can get those data.
We have a question here.
Hi, thank you very much all for your talk and your presentation to us. So going back to what that looks like for us to help you get those measurements, is that about a large group of us putting ourselves forward and saying, tell us what you want on farm, what does a measurement station or monitoring facility look like? How can we make it more accessible so that you can get those measurements and monitoring that you need? Give us the criteria of capturing those different levels of carbon and saying, want it from here, from there, and there's your station, and I come and collect that data once a year, and that feeds into a bigger pool so that we can make our resilience, our management more proactive rather than necessarily reactive. What would that look like to you?
That's a good question. It's a tough question, but so there's different aspects to that. Soil sampling and collecting soil data is difficult, really difficult, because, and this is why you can't do things just with remote sensing, right? There's a lot of people telling you that there's remote sensing systems that they can fly with drones and aeroplanes, satellites, whatever, and they can collect all of this data over large areas of land. But they're only looking at the top millimeter, if that, of soil, right? So you can't do it. We know that there's too much variation in soil, not just across landscapes, but also with depth. So this remote sensing thing, I'm not saying the data is useless, but definitely is not the only thing that you're going to need. So to get soil data, you need to go and you need to dig a hole. You need to take the soil out. So I think, and some of the work that I did at CSIRO and that I'm hoping to progress here, is that we need to develop systems that help you do all of that. We need to automate those systems, that mechatronic systems that will help you take the soil out, put it into some device, and then automate the measurement so that the measurement is cost efficient. That's one aspect, this technological engineering aspect to that problem. The other one is the spectroscopy, which is the modeling that will give you that. So I'm currently working on trying to convince the Clean Energy Regulator that they should do this as part of the method, because they've produced this really lovely world-class method for measuring soil, but they haven't told people how to implement it. So there is a protocol, but a lot of people won't read the protocol, and the ones that read it can't find it. So the thing is, it's a software platform that once you've taken that measurement, that spectrum goes up into this cloud, and then what you get out as a farmer or somebody who's interested in this data, it's just the data, and an estimate of the particulate, mineral-associated carbon, all these things, plus some uncertainty.
If we take on-farm soil samples, we feed that back to our suppliers for fertilisers and all those kind of things, is there not an alliance there to be formed, which is that when we take all of our soil sampling, that some of those filter off?
Absolutely.
Yeah, is that not a kind of, we already pay for that already, so you remove the complication of going onto a farm and asking for a second set of soil samples. A proportion of that is separated off and goes to
Absolutely.
Your sampling.
That's exactly what you need. We've tried to do that in the past, but we haven't succeeded.
And maybe some of the proponents doing the soil sampling for fertiliser are.
And you know, I really like that, and I really support that, because the more data that we can collect to train, we use machine learning to train these spectral models. The more data that we can collect, the better our models are going to perform. So it's a dynamic system that's always building and growing, so that eventually the cost of soil carbon measurement will be so small that everybody will be able to do it. Just one more point about all of this, which I forgot, so go on.
Is there a question down this side of the room? I've not heard much from down there. No? Yes, thank you. I'll come back up here.
Hi, I'm Christy Kingston from Gamalling Producer. We've heard a lot, and all of this is great, and let's assume that we get all of this done and we're all doing whatever needs to be done and we're getting the measurements and we're doing the things. It still remains that climate change that we've seen so far has been caused by emissions in the past, and we've seen from Michael Robertson's brilliant presentation that it is going to get worse, and the kind of numbers that he's talking about as a best case scenario, a civilisation, modern civilisation threatening. And we talked about Team WA and feeling lonely and, nature is feeling unloved. I'm just curious on anyone's comments about what the rest of Team WA is doing in terms of emissions reductions, and also, can we start talking about climate restoration? How do we reverse global warming? And if we're only talking about dealing with annual emissions, we're still not dealing with what caused it.
Anyone from the panel like to take that? Mandy?
That was a quick hand pass, Mandy. There you go. Nice out of the pack. One really encouraging thing that I'm seeing emerge is the fact that the GGA-led Drought Hub network has been awarded to WA, brings together a pretty powerful group of grower groups that cover NRMs and I think it's about 75 members of Indigenous under one sort of united banner, and will create a really good foundation to pull together universities, the state government, etc., and hopefully JRDC and other partners, MLA and so on, to work with in a pretty connected way to try and make some inroads on this sort of issue. So I think there's some good architecture starting to emerge, but it's going to take all of us to sort of buy into it and lean in. So, but that's very encouraging.
Thanks, Rob. Look, just on that point, I think what we're saying is every sector is getting this pressure. If you don't think the oil and gas sector, the mining sector, they are under incredible pressure. Incredible pressure from their So I suppose what I'm trying to say, don't see farmers as being somehow or other singled out here. This is something that everyone is facing. So the rest of Team WA are being put on this same pressure. Companies like Woodside are being, told, and FMG, they've got to invest in things like hydrogen because they can't keep doing what they've done in the past. So I guess our focus should be today is, well, what can we do in our sector and just understand that everyone is getting the same pressure.
Can I just make one comment for 10 seconds? Yesterday, I'm not sure if they are. I'm glad. I know everyone's feeling pressure from different quarters, but yesterday Woodside was allowed to be net zero by 2050 with a new project that's going ahead when we've just had the Australian Academy of Science put out a report on the risks of a 3-degree world, saying that to limit global warming to 1.5, there's no room for new gas. And I'll finish by saying net zero by whatever year actually means let's keep making climate change worse until at least that year. And so yesterday, net zero by 2050 was given to Woodside, so they're allowed to keep making things worse for 30 years. I don't think that's the same pressure.
Well, but farming is part of it. We can't. Yeah, 25% of emissions are farming, so no one's coming to this thing with clean hands. We're not talking about closing no more farming from tomorrow because, we're realising it's a transition.
Yeah, great presentations, and we heard about, we having to make changes. I think we're talking a measurement, we're talking snapshots in time. And what we really need is real-time measurement. So if that means probes, we're measuring all the time so that we can actually have, and that's not just carbon, that could be methane, the whole impact that we have on the ecosystem. We need to measure that in real time because it fluxes, it goes up and down all the time. And until we do that, we can't really judge the impact of different changes to management that are going to have the positive impact over time that we need.
Probably more a comment about the question that was asked earlier on. I left school in the 75, 76 drought and the 2006 and 7 drought. I lost $1.5 million. Been living through climate change for my entire career. So I'm excited about this carbon industry, but to bring the other 3,000 to 4,000 farmers in Western Australia along, it needs financial reason to do it. At the moment, we're growing double the amount of grain and wool and everything we produce than we did 25 years ago. So the only thing that's not surviving is our communities and our cities. Our cities and our communities and our roads and our infrastructure are being damaged by climate change more than our businesses are. So we're actually thriving in this environment because of our skills of adaptation and technology. So what I see is there's a small group of farmers doing natural regeneration of bushland and farms, but there is no incentive to actually go the next step and become a carbon storage farmer because we're already, the fear of it's one of it, but we're already making enough money not to do it. And the fear of stepping out of line and going a different path and losing 5 generations of infrastructure and heritage, nothing compared to what was there before with the First Nations, but they're the reasons why farmers aren't doing it. It's not because we're climate deniers, is because there's no reason to do it, because we're doing better than we ever have done before.
Well, look, can I just comment on that? And I absolutely accept for a lot of farmers that's the view that they're taking. But you saw our friend from the CSIRO from BOM showing us where it was going and that in some areas already it was having an impact. So I guess my view is that anyone that is happy with business as usual, we're not going to be able to, talk to them, engage with them on this topic. But I guess what we've been trying to present today is that data that's showing where the markets are going, right? And so you might be sitting, you know, in Three Springs and saying, life is hunky-dory, I'm making more money than I've ever made. You know, why bother? But if you're looking at where the market is going, if you're thinking, well, what's this going to be like for my daughter or my son in 10 years' time who might want to be farming with me, and the market has totally changed, and that the financiers are changing, so your ability to be able to go out and get some money from ANZ or Rabobank is going to change because they're going to be asking these questions. Now, I mean, my job, I see it, is just sort of like trying to help people see what is further, what's over the horizon here, what's going to happen. You know, if it's just talking about what's obvious, well, you don't need me to do that. I mean, everyone knows that better than I do. And we are trying, and this is what this whole thing is about. We've got things like the Land Restoration Fund, which opens at the end of the month, that will be offering particular incentives on top of things like what is being done through the Federal Carbon Emissions Fund. So, you know, having streams of incentive for people that might want to get into that business of selling carbon credits. So we're doing that. This other fund is basically about creating the enablers, right? We're not going to go out and subsidise farmers to change their system. What we want to do is put strategic money in to make it possible for those that are ready and that wanting to make the transition, make that more realistic and make that, so that's...
I'm like some cancer survivor, I'm nearly 60, I haven't got bloody time to wait for another 20 years for the world to change.
That's right. But
I want to see something happen, and
yeah,
I'm
well,
glad
we can't create miracles, but what we can do, and that's what we're trying to find today, is those sorts of things. And I think coming out from this discussion today, we know that there has been soil data before. We haven't got enough of that data, and so that's obviously probably part of what we have to do with this climate emissions fund is to resilience fund is to try to get better soil data, try to help work through better calculators to so people are going to be able to do that. But we want your, you know, no, I don't have any magic solution. I can see some directions, and we just want to know how can we get those people, those, you know, if we got 500 farmers in WA that were wanting to move in this direction, that would be a very significant thing. And can I just tell you this, and Debbie could probably, with the Southern Rangelands, I must say, I think there has just been this incredible cultural change. And what it came about is, to a significant extent, is this money was available for carbon credits. And so people got in, well, yeah, this is good, human-induced regeneration, we'll get some carbon credits. But what it actually started doing was far more significant than those people that were just getting those carbon credits. It got people thinking differently. It got groups were formed. And then suddenly they're looking at, well, what more can we do? What more can we do? It was sort of almost like, and that's what I say about carbon credits, it's a bit of a Trojan horse to get people thinking differently.
Fantastic. I'm going to take one last question. You've had one go. I would like someone from this end to have a go. Sorry, I'm being a bit like that today.
Michael? Oh, quick question for Richard. Richard, RO desalination is pretty energy hungry. Can you tell us a little bit about how that can be sustainably rolled out in a way that doesn't basically involve lots of litres of diesel getting burnt?
Yeah, currently the adoption of RO systems probably is about 30% full solar. So they're remote solar systems, so they're not on diesel. So I guess that's how it's happening. There are biogenerator systems that are out there. There are solar, as in thermal solar type systems out there. But at the moment we've got 5 suppliers that are family businesses in Perth, which is incredible, and they're running full belt to try and get these systems out until it rained, and then everyone's gone back indoors again, and they're all sitting around waiting for the phone to call.
Richard, haven't we got one here at Muresk? Isn't there one of the solar?
Yes.
Solar operated, their solar units.
It was here. It's moved 10 k's down the road.
I'd like you to put your hands together for this team. They kept the time.
Okay, the Minister talked about it. Here we are, the finance industry. Everyone talks about the finance industry. We're providers of capital. So it doesn't really matter whether it's us, whether it's private equity that's coming in. We are co-investors in your business. But more importantly than that, we are corporate citizens, and there's expectations placed upon us to be good corporate citizens. Now, you can all argue that. But the reality being is we deal with the whole of society. And society no longer now will accept what has been done in the past. And we need to be accountable for that. The other thing is, we've got a fairly big investment in your industry. So we want to see practices that are sustainable. We want to see the longevity and the profitability of ag industries in Australia and in WA. So therefore, we've got a responsibility to make sure that good practices are being undertaken. If you want to see what any of the banks believe, just all you need to do is pick up one of their annual reports. They'll actually talk about their sustainability practices. They'll talk about their sustainability policies, and climate change is one of those. We see it as a real risk. Why? Because we've got a lot of money invested in the industry. So we need to be proactively managing risk. That's what we do. We manage risk, and climate change is one of those. Of course, our exposure is much wider than just agriculture. So you'll see that the banks have talked about exiting out of the coal industry. You'll see about the financial institutions wanting to invest in renewable energy. You will see us stepping away from practices that are no longer deemed acceptable by society today. There are many, many susceptible and high-risk industries. Some of those are quite obvious, some of them aren't. And some of those high-risk industries, or sensitive industries, are actually involved in agriculture. And we need to make sure that there isn't pollution. You know, farming near, sensitive areas. Industries that in the past had put contamination into the environment. You know, society is not going to accept that. Why should we? Why should we promote and support industries that aren't looking at improving the environment? Society will not accept it, and therefore we cannot either. If you have a look, we have to clean up our own backyard. I do work for the National Bank, and I have done for 1 or 2 years, nearly 30. We've actually been carbon neutral the last 10 years, and that's easy in comparison to what some other industries have to do. But it doesn't allow us to step away from our corporate responsibilities. We look at reducing energy reducing energy use. We look at what are we actually producing. You know, everyone looks at how banking has changed and going to everything being online. Can you imagine what that's saved in paper waste in tonnage? Hundreds of thousands of tonnes that otherwise would have gone into landfill. Our water use, vehicles, I do a lot more walking, and air travel. We're not seeing anywhere near as many people from the East Coast. Not necessarily bad, but we are looking at all those because we have to look at our own backyard. You know, we have to be responsible finance. You know, if you look at, you know, many of the reviews into the banking industry, they talk about responsible lending. Well, this is part of responsible lending. So anyone that's involved in corporate or institutional businesses would say, you know, there's not a lot new. We've had the bank evaluating our business, looking at our carbon footprint and looking at what we're doing to minimise it. That's true, we have been doing it institutional, and again the Minister's talked about the mining industry and the likes, and they've got a lot of responsibility and we actually monitor that. But we also look at general farming businesses. We need to be making sure that those practices actually make sense. They're not damaging the environment. Excuse me. So, you know, the banking industry is quite open about wanting to finance into a low carbon environment, a climate resilient economy. And we want to make sure that, well, what we've actually done is many of us have aligned with the Paris Agreement. So we're no different to many others, including the government. So, okay, that sounds all good, but what does it actually mean? The banking industry has worked with CFC, Clean Energy Finance Corporation, and there was funding available to allow farmers to use better farming practices, whether that's more efficient machinery, whether that's better machinery fit for purpose, where we were able to offer a discount to farmers. And that discount was immediately passed on. The ticket wasn't clipped by the banking industry as it went through. Those full benefits were passed on to farmers. But the whole idea was improving efficiencies, lowering the carbon footprint. So we have a look. What else do we look at? In time, I mean, we're still evaluating what are the implications of all our lending. What that actually means is a carbon footprint. It's pretty big. So we know, as a result of our lending, there's a very large carbon footprint out there. So we're looking at how does that impact and what we can do to assist it. We don't have all the answers. We're not pretending to have all the answers. But what we're saying is we're actively working towards a lower carbon emission economy. So we'll continue to look at greenhouse gases. We'll continue to look at how we can assist our customers. What we can do, you know, is there more any efficient ways? You know, many of our cold stores all go with solar on, you know, their cool rooms and the likes. That's good business sense, and we're not going to get away from commercial realities. So, you know, we're not going to sit there and say, you know, we're going to fund something that isn't commercial. You guys don't want it, and we're not going to do it. But we're always looking at how do we assist you to be better. And we know that we'll always have the social conscience on us as well as are we doing the right thing. I'm going to actually save you that 1 minute, Charlie. So you will continue to see questions being asked down at your level. You'll continue to see questions asked in valuations if they're done on properties. You know, so we're not the only industry. The valuation industry will also be looking at what are the type of practices being completed on properties. Is it actually sustainable? Is it damaging? So you will not get away from the fact that every key stakeholder in this industry is looking at carbon emissions, low carbon economies, how can we do things better, how do we increase efficiencies, and how do we all, at the end of the day, remain profitable? Because you all have to remain profitable if you want to stay in business. Thank you.
Hello everyone. Thank you for giving me the chance to speak today, Minister, at your forum. Very important. Like Charlie said, I'm speaking with my Churchill Fellowship hat. So last year I received a Churchill Fellowship to investigate the consumer drivers and incentives for regenerative agriculture. So I'm going to take a little step further than what Andrew did. I'm going to talk about regenerative agriculture. And I know it is a very controversial term, but I guess I just wanted to start with a story of I caught up with a farmer 2 months ago at a pub, just me and him in the central CBD pub. So I asked him, what do you think of regen ag? What do you think? He put down his beer, he leaned into me, and he lowered his voice. He said, I think it works. So that scenario said to me what people actually thought of regen ag in the ag sector. You know, it's all talked about, you know, under the covers and everything. So anyway, let's go into why I picked regenerative agriculture. Look, I'm not into the controversial type of things. Maybe I'm a little bit, but I'm thinking about my son and his future. Right, we've talked about soils being depleted, and I think about my son, his future generations. We need to actually regenerate the soils. So what's my project about? There are two main aspects to it, the consumer drivers and the incentive side of things. So today I'm just going to talk about the consumer drivers part of it. Part of that includes examining all the big food companies. So Minister mentioned a few earlier, PepsiCo, Nestle. So what is big food? These are all the brands here. So when you go to a supermarket, you see all these brands. You think you have a choice. You don't have a choice. They're owned by those big companies. So today, I'm going to be focusing on General Mills and Nestle. The Minister mentioned PepsiCo earlier. So firstly, in General Mills, what brands do they own? They're an American-based company. They own brands like Haagen-Dazs, Nature Valley, Yoplait, Betty Crocker as well. So when I first started scoping out my regen project back in 2019, General Mills was synonymous with the term regenerative agriculture. So in March 2019, they made a commitment to advance regenerative agriculture on 1 million acres of farmland by 2030. I like that little infographics there that says that's almost as big as the Grand Canyon. And I think they've linked it to it combats climate change. So just wanted to highlight a few examples of what they're actually doing since making that commitment in 2019, highlighting it from the producer end all the way to the consumer end. So they have 3 pilot trials to help convert to help trial regenerative practices on with oat farmers, wheat farmers, and dairy farmers. So these are all suppliers of each of their brands. So we're talking about, 250, about 300, less than 300,000 hectares. So a bit of a way to a million, close to 1 million acres. So it's a 3-year trial. This is the 2nd year that they're trialing it. So I'm very excited to hear about what their results are. So in terms of what they're doing with these farmers, I think, Minister, you're on the right track here. They're holding workshops, and then they're giving individual mentoring and advice to each of these farmers over the 3-year period. Then they're gathering all the information, profitability, and even things like whether it works or not. So efficacy, profitability. So looking forward to next year to the results. On the consumer end, one of their brands is Epic Provisions. I don't think we have it here in Australia. 3 of their products are branded with the Savory Institute's Land to Market Ecological Outcome Verification Seal. It's a long mouthful to say practices that improve soil health, biodiversity, and ecosystem function. That's just one company. So the second company I want to talk about is Nestle. December of last year, 2020, I was so excited when Nestle, the biggest of the big food company, released their commitment, if you like, net zero by 2050. That's followed up in February of this year by a really detailed roadmap. Sorry, you can't see it. This is just one page of it, of a very detailed roadmap that's measurable KPIs and very time-bound KPIs even. So Nestle is the biggest of the big food company. I thought General Mills was big. I thought when they made that commitment, it was mainstreaming those practices. That General Mills is 21 on the scale. Nestle is number 1. Nestle's sales revenue last year was $76 billion. But don't forget, that's US billion. So in our billion is 76,000 million. They buy 1% of the world agricultural output, and their greenhouse gas footprint is twice the size of Switzerland's. So we're talking about a massive company here. And they've made time-bound, very transparent commitments, if you like. So they're going to source 20% of their key ingredients through regenerative agricultural methods by 2025, 50% by 2030. And they've linked the regenerative agriculture pathway to emission reductions. Minister touched on Pepsico, 7 million acres globally, so that's 7 times what General Mills committed to. And that was just released in April 2021, so a few months ago. I think what I wanted to highlight here is they have already worked with 85,000 acres of land in the US and made that link to 38% net greenhouse gas reduction. And they plan to expand that to 500,000 acres of US farmland by the end of 2022. So I guess, so what? You asked me, they're all Americans. I totaled up the 2019 sales revenue of these 3 companies. Nestle was number 1, Pepsico is number 2. General Mills is 21. They total more than 160,000 million, so that's converted into the Australian numbers. That's 8% of Australia's GDP, right? That's a massive footprint. So I guess what I want to highlight today is the trend. So General Mills announced it in 2019, March 2019. Nestle announced December 2020. A few months later, PepsiCo announced it. So this momentum is building. And I guess the challenge for us here today is to make sure that we're not left behind, I think. And what is interesting about these 3 companies is they talk about climate reduction, but they also talk about regenerative agriculture. They actually use the term regenerative agriculture as a pathway to achieving the emission reductions. So, yeah, I want to say thank you for the time, and hopefully it'll be a good discussion later. Look forward to that.
Thanks for the introduction and thanks for the opportunity to speak today. So today I'm going to stand here as a marketer and talk to you about the marketing imperatives that we're seeing at the moment from both a global market and a domestic market imperative that's sort of driving the move towards differentiating Western Australian grain. So CBH, as you're all aware, we manage 90% of the crop that's grown in Western Australia, and the marketing and trading arm, which I'm a part of, we buy and sell and market 50% of that on average all across the world to our markets. The main thing we exist for is to return and maximise value to our grower members. So that's every grower in Western Australia who grows a crop and delivers it into the CBH system. One of the keys to doing that over time has been differentiating grain and differentiating our grain. So I just want you to ask the question, how much of Western Australia's grain do you think is actually differentiated and we receive a market access premium or a premium? Just throw some numbers at me. How much of it? 20%. Oh, Tony. You're almost on the nose, mate. You were almost spot on, mate. I was throwing a furphy. So I'm going to roll this one out again because it gives a good platform as to why the hell CBH are involved in wanting to go down the sustainability path and God forbid the carbon neutral path. The reality is our markets over time are changing and changing pretty rapidly in both the sustainability certification space and then more recently the carbon neutral space. And we've heard a lot of examples today as to what we're hearing, and we're hearing them as well. WA grain is not that differentiated. Roughly 80% of what we grain is not that special, and we don't receive a premium for it. We do a great job of producing it. It's clean green, and we try and get a premium for that. But the reality is, over time, and this is 3 years combined, it's a little bit old, so forgive me, but our non-GM canola that we sell into Europe is what you would classify a market access premium. It's differentiated for 2 reasons. Obviously, it's a non-GM grain, but the important piece here, and which gives context to me standing up here, is the fact that it's all certified sustainable. So in 2008, the European Union, moved a decade before anybody and demanded all the grain that we sold up there, our canola into the bio industry, be certified sustainable. So we've been doing that successfully since 2008. We sort of fumbled along for 10 years, just not really knowing what we had here. But in the last couple of years, we had some really key conversations with big customers. Heineken, for one, world's second biggest brewer, basically said to us, we're not going to accept any grain unless it's certified sustainable. So we already knew we had a platform here, ICC, for our canola. So we spoke to ICC and we discovered that they had another accreditation which we could piggyback off that called ICC Plus. So I'm happy to say that we have successfully piggybacked off that, and in 2 years we've moved 4.5 million tonnes essentially of wheat, barley, lupins and oats, which was not previously certified, into this sort of space. Now, we're not getting the premiums that we're getting in canola, but we've given ourselves a chance. We are now selling malt barley to Heineken into Mexico, which we never had. We lost the China market, so we needed attributes like this certification to be able to crack markets like that and maintain them into the future. So, 150,000 tonnes of Western Australian malt barley into Mexico is a great achievement, and it's on the back of this certification. So that gets us into the, like I said, the main reason for being here is that carbon neutrality is a potential piece there that we can, again, move into the differentiated space. Obviously, there's a lot of environmental benefits that come with it, but from a marketing perspective, there are opportunities in this. Now, to go back to Heineken, they said, well, I think they've claimed that they want 100% sustainable accredited inputs by 2025. For all intents and purposes, they're already doing that for their grain. As far as I'm aware, about 80% of that is already sustainable. We're producing 100. But their next flag on the hill, we want all of our Scope 3 providers to give us certified carbon neutral grain. So that's the next flag on the hill. They're not alone. We're starting to get those ESG-driven targets from a lot of the multinationals globally. So that's what's been moving, and that's what's changed rapidly in the last couple of years. It's the ESG targets. They're getting more and more aggressive. I mean, it's a good thing, and for us, it's an opportunity. So from our perspective, the last 12 months, we've sort of been looking at this carbon neutral solution, and to your point, we had an MOU with Wide Open Agriculture. We thought carbon was a pathway to, or an economic pathway towards, allowing growers to access markets. And if that benefited them economically, well, then they would then choose to, potentially change their practices to lower their emissions if it provided them economic benefit. So we've been working for the last 12 months trying to understand how we can plug in to what we call third Scope 3 emissions for CBH, which is on-farm. So the on-farm emissions is a little bit of it's a tough one at the moment, so we've worked really hard in the last, we've been capturing and measuring our carbon footprint since about 2012. I think we've been placing that on government websites. It's there for everybody to see. And we think our Scope 1 and 2 moving into, transport, so shipping into our countries, our road and our rail is quite a simple calculation, quite a simple formula. So we're quite comfortable with our Scope 1s and 2s. What we're not comfortable with is the farm. We're not here to do trials of one container and sell one truckload here. I mean, we sell 50,000 tonnes at a time. So we're looking at we want a solution whereby we can plug into a carbon calculator system on farm in Western Australia, whereby we can quite simply calculate the full end-to-end supply chain carbon emission and then offer that to our customer. Now, that may be a customer like Heineken, or it could be into the European Union who are threatening to tax and have an equalisation tax in the future. We don't know how far in the future that is, but that's the flag on the hill for Australia and Australian growers. I mean, I'd hate to think that we didn't have the ability to measure our own grain on farm and measure our end-to-end supply chain and then rely on the European Union to make that decision and make those measurements for us and that tax. So that's the flag on the hill and the opportunity as far as we see. So like I said, we've been developing some things and we heard some good things and really good things being done by Richard Blake. He's to be congratulated for the work he's done in Western Australia, but it's a good start. But as you saw from his presentation, there's some real variance in the carbon outputs that we're seeing. So I think there's a piece of work there now, which means we have to get our fingers more dirty in this and really get that data set robust and make sure that, from a pathway towards, what would you call it, verifying these calculators, we can then quite easily, from a grower perspective and a market perspective, plug into it. At the moment, we're a little way to go, and we think there's a really good opportunity. We've helped design a potential pilot there, a carbon neutral grain pilot, and we're hopeful that that will, provide some capacity for us to get there. So, thank you very much.
We now have the panel discussion. We've got around 20 minutes for this, so who would like to open up? Tony York.
How you going? Tony York. Is that on?
It's on.
Tony York, farmer from Tamman. I'm just interested, I'm a little bit confused today, to be honest, because I actually came here thinking I was really only needed or was really focusing on carbon neutrality and climate change, and that was the driver, and I've got signals that are telling me that if I'm carbon neutral, I might, that's the immediate signals. I'm not getting the signals that are telling me I have to be regenerative. And I think there's a language problem here, and I'm interested in I-Lyn's comments because she's telling me that in her mind, Nestle define carbon neutrality as being regenerative, and I'm not convinced of that. And in my own business, I'm thinking, with a bit of tweaking, I can be carbon neutral pretty easily, and I'm willing to have a go. And a few mechanisms, I probably think I can probably get there relatively easily. But if my perception of what regenerative is too big a risk, too much of a change, if I'm correct in what I'm understanding it. So can someone clarify me, are we talking about one and the same thing if we're talking about regenerative and carbon neutrality, or are they two different things?
I think, this is on. I think you've got to think about it, in my mind, it's an outcome versus a process. I think a month ago, I read a really good article trying to define what regenerative agriculture is. It's difficult. I acknowledge that, it's difficult. So if we look at Nestle and Pepsico, their outcome is carbon reduction. So Nestle is net zero by 2050, but they've identified the pathway to achieving that outcome as regenerative agriculture practices. And that's only one of it. If you look at the actual roadmap, it defines a whole suite of tools to achieve that net zero emissions. And in my mind, this is how it would work. You've got outcomes, whether it's emissions reduction, organic, whatever you want to achieve. The pathways could be regenerative agriculture. And that's where we need to have a suite of tools in Regen Ag. And I think there was a lot of people who talked about how each farm is different. You need that suite of tools to help you along your pathway. So it's a process to achieve an outcome. That's how I'm seeing it. Other people might disagree with me, but that's how I'm seeing the Nestle and the Pepsico, commitments.
Perfect answer. No, I think you're spot on. I think they're not the same thing. One's an outcome of the other. We're hopeful that if there's an economic imperative to reduce or incentive to reduce your carbon, well then regen is a tool in the toolkit that can allow you to potentially get there.
Thanks. Another question? Oh, sorry. Yep. Larissa?
Thanks, panel. Thanks, all. First of all, Minister, I just want to say keep going. Like, your leadership is outstanding, and you've been ahead of the curve facing into climate resilience, and keep going because, yeah.
And I hope your speech this morning was recorded, because I think everyone in our various communities, and they're very rich communities, should look at that speech. I would love everyone in State Parliament to see that speech. It just sets the tone for where we've got to go. And we've got to get to the best, closest pathway to 1.5 degrees C by 2050. The world economy is already decarbonising, and we are in the box seat in agriculture in Western Australia to address some of our environmental issues and transform our economy into a low carbon future. And this discussion today just gives me so much encouragement. I just, we've got 2 buckets of $15 million. It's not much, but we can leverage it if we're really smart about it. For example, already the drought resilience funding, outstanding. We're leveraging that. So there's $200 million in the Australian Climate Service federally. How could we use this to leverage that? So my question, I guess, to the panel is, we need short-term, medium-term and long-term initiatives to get to net zero by 2050. And what suite of activities? We've talked about the metadata set earlier today. We've talked about the low-hanging fruit of technology we already have with the desal, distributed energy and salination solutions. What's the suite? What are we missing? Is there anything we've missed in thinking about how to kick off this transitioning of WA Ag, particularly broadacre, mixed enterprise? And a second question is, to anyone who'd answer, maybe the Minister, is where's the participation of our Noongar First Nations in this, and how can we partner with them? Thanks very much.
I'm going to nominate Ross to answer the first part of the question, and then you'd like to answer the second part.
So the economist in me tends to answer with 2 words. It's about supply and demand. So if we're thinking of decades ahead, we already know, and Trevor's intimated this, and I-Lyn, that there's already the demand signals for a change in the way agricultural products are produced. We know that demand is going to eventually also affect the supply, that is the technologies that underpin what we produce. So I'm fairly comfortable with the fact that the direction that West Australian agriculture will head in, that is, it will be pulled in that direction and pushed in that direction, is one that will lead to products being produced with lower emissions. But nonetheless, and importantly for many farmers who maybe aren't in this room, it will be undertaken by farm businesses that depend on, if you like, traditional technologies that greatly improve and reduce the emission intensity of all the products that they produce. So I think the future is quite bright because a few reasons. One, growers own their supply chains. That's one of the strengths of WA agriculture. So the ability to deliver from farm to consumer in a transparent, integrated way is much easier a task than if I was, say, a New South Wales farmer. And I think that's a real plus for WA agriculture. There's more I could say, but I think that's enough.
Minister, do you want to respond to the second?
I'll just briefly respond to the second. Oral Maguire is here, one of the Balladong landowners, and is certainly one of the Noongar leaders in the farming space. And look, we are working with the Aboriginal landowners right across the state. One of the things that we're finding is this engagement in regenerative practices, because people see this respects their land. So there's, and Mike Bowley here has been working with some groups in the Midwest, and we're working in the Gascoyne, and they embrace it because for them, for many of the native title holders, this is really respectful in their view of their land. But listen, I want to ask another very practical question. So we've got farmers here like Di, who grows barley and various crops. How do we? I know in the department we do, enormous amount of work about helping people with value add and assisting people that want to turn their apples into cider, etc. And developing export markets. How can we help those people that are already using these practices that protect natural capital? If we could stay away from the R word, we want to get the good turning upset. But, if we're looking at those systems that respect natural capital and that are going to produce this good carbon outcome, what's a practical way that we can help link those things up in Australia for here and now, for those people that want to embrace the opportunity?
Who'd like to go? Trevor?
It's a really good question in terms of, I'm going to speak to Regen. I've been interested in Regen for quite a few years, and one of the tough ones is the definition of it, and the certification of it is probably a real challenge in that space. So what we're concentrating on in the carbon space and the sustainable, they're certified. Certifying Regen is difficult. There's not many models out there that allow it to be able to market it in that space. So that leaves you with a marketing and a story, and potentially the nutritional benefits of the product that you're producing. So I think the latter two are critical. There's a marketing piece here, but there's also the nutritional benefits piece, which hasn't been done at scale. So I think there's definitely opportunity there. In terms of the certification, it's really tough because one of the benefits of, and one of the most unique things about Regen, what I know about it, is that it is unique and it is different to everybody, and it's difficult to box. So you can touch on it.
People are doing that already. You've got growers that look. How do we link the people up?
I think there's networks out there already that are linked, whether or not they're extensive enough, Alannah, and there's already some strong networks out there, and I've seen that and witnessed that grow, that environment grow in the last 5 years faster than a lot of other networks in Western Australia. So it's happening organically or naturally.
I was just going to say you need shorter supply chain or segregated supply chain, because you talk about segregated supply chains. But I also think, Minister, that yes, that's the nutrition piece. So the Asian consumer, where we sell a lot of our stuff to, it values food safety and nutrition. And more so after the pandemic. I think, Walter, you talked about nutritional integrity, about preventative things. If I could tell you how much vitamins I send back to my parents, it's all about prevention now. Everyone is on this. So that research, Minister, would be so important for us to help sell our products into Asia. The other side of things is obviously food safety. A lot of people buy organic. They think it's sustainable, but they actually are into the food safety aspect. Zero chemicals, it's all about food safety. So those two things. And if I could also say that I think there needs to be a linkage to profitability. So Tony, you talked about carbon neutrality. I also think the other outcome could be more profitable practices. So Regen Ag, if there is a linkage between Regen Ag and profitability, you might be able to get those farmers that are the third wave. Walter, did you talk about the third wave of farmers? Someone talked about the first adopters, second adopters. We need to go to the third level adopters now.
Just really quickly, just touching on that chemical, or the food safety, we just canvassed all of our customers globally, and the number one attribute that they are concerned about is chemical residue. So again, output of potentially regenerative farming, the way we get there potentially is regen and or other practices.
Can't help but put the banker hat on. Why do good businesses fail? Often because they don't understand their customer base. I hate to say it's that simple, but it is. Over 30 years of banking, I've seen lots of really good businesses. A lot have failed because they've failed to understand what their customer is willing to pay for and why. There is no point producing a product that no one wants. So this is my only word of caution. Don't go out and produce a product because you can. There has to be a market for it. And I agree, we need the linkages between the buyers of your product and the end market, but there needs to be a market in the first place. And no doubt there is. I mean, Europe is a classic example. I sat at ABARE 5 years ago, and one of the EU commissioners sat up there and said, why are we doing the things that we're doing? Because our consumer will pay for it, and therefore we can. So there is a market out there, but unless you've got linkages to it, you are selling into a commodity-driven market, and you're not going to get the premiums you need to be profitable. Now, I'm also going to make the separation between profitability and sustainability. They're not one and the same. So we want businesses to be sustainable, but we also want you to be profitable.
You have a question here?
Thanks. This one was angled at Trevor, but I'll throw it across to Andrew as well. Trevor, you did touch on so CBH sort of looking at with their Scope 3 and the potential for CN and at the farm level, and you spoke to Richard's analysis that he's done of the tools. Do you see a future, in the future, the potential for CBH to essentially drive or standardise a tool so that the measurements can become standardised? And because to my mind that this becomes sort of market leading, which is what a number of producers will want to be seeing is market led, and then throwing that then to Andrew, would that then sort of support the finance sector, I suppose, coming in behind that, whereby the market is leading producers to be benchmark their carbon footprints to be benchmarked, for then for the security and sustainability?
Right now, the appetite in CBH is not to lead that right now. The appetite is to support the industry to understand measurement, because it's bigger than CBH. We've got your Glencores and the ADMs and the Cargills of the world who want Western Australian grain as well. So the farmer should benefit from that, not in a closed loop system, but to everybody and every marketing option that they have. So for that reason, we would hopefully work collaboratively with the industry in Western Australia to be able to develop those measurements. For now, it's not to say in the future we may not develop our own systems to plug into, so that we can then and we'll probably need to do that anyway. But first things first, we need to make sure the measurements are accurate and verifiable.
No question in regards to the finance industry. We will definitely support something that supports our customers. So the last thing we want to see is customers disadvantaged by our practices. So if there are impacts on your business that we can assist, we're definitely going to do it, because in simplistic terms, it's a commercial decision to make.
Okay. I know there's more questions, but I'm just conscious of time, that we're at 2:30, and I am trying to keep us on track. So I think of all the sessions so far, this one we could probably discuss for about another hour or so. So please, if you've got questions, write them down, because when we move into the session at the end of the day, you'll get the chance to put those on the table. So again, if there's any of the sessions that you've had ideas, please capture them, and when you get that opportunity later on today, please do that then. So I'd like you to put your hands together for the panel, and thank you.
Just before I start, Andrew, thanks for those comments about profitability and sustainability. It's very rare that you hear someone speak so honestly in a public forum. I've been trying for years to get our produce not tested because I think it's better, but tested because I just want to know. I've taken it 10 uses, and regardless of whether it's better or not, they don't even want to test it anyway. So, yeah, without any further ado, I'll be the only one today reading from notes by the seams of it. Hi, and thank you for the opportunity to tell our story. I recently spoke at World Soils Day and subsequently met some people that have supported and encouraged me to speak today. I would like to thank them. You know who you are. I would also like to thank my wife. She does the tech work that I'm not so good at, which I need to get this thing. See? Which one do I push? Spacebar? There we go. Right. She does all this tech work that I'm not so good at. She has photoshopped the farm to make it not look so shabby for today. That's my happy place at the front of the veranda where we talk about what we're going to do next. A big thank you to the Minister for putting aside today and meeting with us all. Climate mitigation is what we are here for. I began mitigating risk 18 years ago. I never dreamed that the consequences would evolve to standing here today. Mitigating risk in agriculture and mitigating climate change for me is all the same thing. I believe it can be a win-win. Spacebar. No, not yet. Our farming system has never been a secret, but we've neither promoted or advertised it. So this is me coming out. Our system may not be perfect. Everything is a work in progress. It is a hybrid. We continue to trial and explore ways to extract value from our best and most precious resource, our soil. Rotation and execution are essential. Poor rotation and poor execution will result in failure. That was when I was supposed to spacebar, I think. Dorothy McKellar wrote of sunburnt country, which includes the famous cry, "A land of droughts and flooding rains." Well, I wish she'd mentioned frost. Climate mitigation is about a lot of things. Frost has nearly financially crippled us several times over the years. In recent years, to mitigate the climate risk, we've moved to a more conservative cropping program. Wheat went from our largest enterprise to our smallest. We now have an emphasis on pastures and fodders to not only lessen risk, but improve soil organic N. The concern with a large livestock operation is how to manage it in a dry season, and we'll get to livestock in a minute. I changed the way we farm 18 years ago. Our goal was sustainable land use. We aim to produce as much as possible with the least synthetic inputs while leaving the soil in the best possible condition. In recent years, we have had paddocks that have produced 3.75 tonnes with less than 10 units of N. To make this work, water holding capacity becomes critical. For this to occur, we have focused on soluble calcium with a simple message: the roots fix dirt. We are using a hybrid farming model. This model is a balance between conventional agricultural fertilisers combined with Australian Soil Planners' farming system for nearly 18 years. The ASP system has a focus on soil health and remediation of chemical and fertiliser use from our conventional inputs. The synergies of how we farm will flow onto climate mitigation through the low use of synthetic N. I believe synthetic N is going to be the major carbon contributor to agriculture. When we as farmers participate in a carbon footprint calculation, synthetic N use will be critical. So with N use in mind, please consider the following. Our crops this year have been grown with 25 kilograms of a MAP SOP 70/30 blend, amounting to 2.5 units of granular N. Added to this is a liquid fertiliser developed by ASP with 10 units of urea ammonium nitrate added for another 4 units. Our total in-crop N use is less than 7 units on a large part of the farm. Poorer rotations and farms bought in recent years can get another 16 units pre-planting with sulphate of ammonia. I contacted a local agronomist yesterday to get a region benchmark. So we are 7 to 23 units depending on rotation. The region average is 45 to 70 units depending on rotation. So we're using 15 to 33% of district practice. We have a couple of paddocks this year being trialled at 4 units, and they look fine. 173 hectare paddock of Illabo has already been grazed by 800 sheep for 2.5 weeks. These nitrogen efficiencies equate to healthy soils that recycle nutrients, risk remediation, less capital application of lime required to remediate it, competitive advantage, and a lower carbon footprint. While we're on nitrogen, because I think it is very important, if you want to mitigate effects of climate on agriculture, we don't even know what source of N is better or worse. The predominant sources in WA we use are urea ammonium nitrate and sulphate of ammonia. I would like to know if there's any research on which sources of N are better for the soil and the environment. So I contacted the Sustainability Agronomy lecturer at the University of Queensland, and at the end of a very long text in reply he said, "I don't know, sorry." So there's a bit of work to do in this space. It's not much point having people out there using different sources of N and not even knowing which one is going to contribute to your major greenhouse gas and make the biggest difference. If urea is volatilising and sulphate of ammonia isn't, where's the equation? And at the moment in carbon calculators, a unit of N is a unit of N. And I reckon they're apples and oranges myself. So we got involved with Associate Professor Paul Dargish from the University of Queensland, and through our group we did carbon footprint last year. Growers from our group in the eastern states were involved and the results varied greatly. One of our growers emitted 5 kilograms of carbon per tonne of grain, and the worst conventional grower emitted 262 kilograms per tonne of grain. So our best grower emitted 2% of what the worst conventional grower emitted. Very significant. To quote Professor Paul Dargish, the world needs this. Livestock. Climate mitigation with livestock. I can hear farmers screaming, what? How are you going to do that? Most districts are losing a livestock producer every year, even in the face of an ever-increasing prices. Yes, water is an issue, but with clever use of your existing resources that can be mitigated mostly. We could talk for 10 minutes on that, but I'm not going to do that here today. Our business already has a plan in place regarding water, and I believe we'll be able to manage without putting any significant pressure on the scheme, and we have no groundwater. In the next few minutes, I'm going to talk to you about experience with mitigating risk, full stop, with livestock. Not just climate, but nutritional and financial risk. People want answers and they'll ask the professors and everything. Well, I think we have a system with livestock that is world's best practice. It has been this practice has been significant to us as no-till farming has been to broadacre cropping. Confinement. During successive dry seasons, as experienced by the eastern states recently, we learned that the biggest problem in drought was the supply of fibre. Grain could usually always be purchased, albeit at a premium. However, the supply of fibre became horribly scarce. We began our own research in conjunction with farmers in the east while being mentored by ISP consultants. We began by taking livestock off the paddocks in the autumn. Nothing new, I know, but we managed to take them off the paddock and confine them for a net cost, if land was included, at not much more than the cost of green grass. We did this with ad-lib straw that was sprayed with nutrition and a stock lick that was specially formulated to ASP recommendations. We have had maternal composite ewes, not 100, we had 2,000 maternal composite ewes in confinement. It was a bloody big trial. We did that for 10 weeks. We took them out and then achieved our best ever lambing percentages of 163% for maternal composites, and a merino flock that was left out in the paddock did 121. We managed the nutrition to our cereal crops differently, so as to enhance the performance of our fibre resource when digested in the rumen. The gains from this are very cheap, but nutrient-dense confinement feeds are enormous. We can maintain condition of the livestock cheaply, and very importantly, we're able to maintain cover on the farm. So instead of waiting for the farm to be bare, then locking up the livestock, we prefer to lock up early and save the feed resource for lambing. The additional benefits of letting the grain feed get established is incredible. So no grain for 10 weeks. That's what gives you competitive advantage, climate mitigation, lower carbon footprint. So we'll get nutrition packages on winter grazed pastures. Much winter grazed pasture is wasted Just when you've got feed, it gets wasted. Scouring livestock, poor pasture utilisation is rife. The nutrition packages we started playing around with 5 years ago were done as trials to get the best from poor pastures. The problem was that the livestock production from our poor pastures, once treated, was better than our best clover pastures. So we now put a nutrition package over all pastures. We noted that within hours of application, the livestock settled, camped earlier, ate less and performed better. The packages include selenium, cobalt, copper, moly, magnesium, calcium. Dry feed, fibre utilisation in the summer. This is something that we've just got onto in the last 18 months. We've only recently appreciated how important fibre management can be. We've formulated a dry feed lick that has tipped the scales in our favour in a big way. We've saved tens of thousands of dollars in hand feeding just with this lick. I had no idea what could be achieved. In February this year, upon completion of shearing, end of January this year, upon completion of shearing, we put 600 merino ewes on 230 hectare paddock of poor oat stubble. This paddock normally would only last a few weeks before hand feeding would be required. My father took lick out to the paddock and the sheep started eating it out of the trailer. Over the ensuing weeks, I would ask Dad when he is going to start feeding these ewes or shift them, and he would reply, "Brendon, they haven't even been all the way around the paddock." After 5 weeks of this, I thought half the bloody mob had been stolen. When we discuss climate mitigation and what can be done, I believe there are enormous efficiencies that can still be achieved in our livestock enterprises. Philosophy versus profit. All of us have a good idea. Information has never been so available. Podcasts, Twitter, Facebook, heaven forbid TikTok. Crikey, our son didn't even want my wife to be vaccinated. Everyone in the social media world is an expert. No credentials required. There's been some discussion about this topic today, and I think it is essential if you're making changes. Once we've decided to act on an idea, especially something that will affect long-term viability of your enterprise, good consultants and role models are essential. Execution of that idea to produce desirable outcomes is not quite so easy. It is much cheaper to spend a lot of time planning if making considerable changes, and best to take small steps. Farming systems have become complex. Very few neighbours do everything the same anymore, if at all. The future ramifications of global politics, carbon footprints, offsets and the like make positioning yourself and your business difficult. Governments and financial institutions are scrambling to position themselves. So where does that leave us? What if policymakers, researchers and farmers in WA were able to identify a systems-based approach to mitigating climate in agriculture? What if we've already done the hard work? You can't go back in time, but I believe we have. We have a benchmark study improving soil health in Western Australian farming systems back in 2005 and 2009. All the hard work has been done. Everything's been tested. 8 biological, 6 chemical and 3 physical elements. Nowhere else may have this data set. I was very involved in this project of 800 sites. We need to ask ourselves, what if we went back to these sites and there is an anomaly? What if we go back to these sites and discover something? Farmers are resourceful. Many of us are trying different things. The 2005 study has as many as 800 sites across our state's largest resource, the wheat belt. From all the different ways these farms have been run, something will show up. We could do something very special. What if we retested these sites, but at the same time tested nutrient density of the produce off the paddocks, and then cross-referenced all the data with soil health results? This could be world-first stuff. You want climate mitigation? I'm certain that it's all linked. Nutrition, carbon, resilience. Thank you very much.
I guess from the purpose of today is really just trying to build into our systems that resilience to cope with what's being dished up, whether it be climatically or market-driven, the whole lot. I think we've got to be addressing everything.
Thanks. And from a Southern Rangelands perspective, I come here and I'm really excited about the buzz in the room, and I know that the Southern Rangelands are quite well poised to deliver or to move into the regenerative space. We've already got, many of us have got carbon projects, and that has been, as the Minister said, the impetus for us to start thinking seriously about improving the soil and improving the landscape and therefore improving our business. And it has to work hand in hand. And with the carbon projects, that gives us the financial incentive and the freedom where we're now no longer in the red, we're operating in the black, and that's a very nice place to be. So we can be green now. And, you know, when you look at the amount of land that one person has authority over, we've got 500,000 acres, and that's an awful lot of soil that we've got to look after, and we're really incentivised to move forward in this space. And I think the Southern Rangelands region has an enormous amount to offer, this whole space of climate resilience and regenerative ag and all of that sort of stuff. So, Minister, I'm really appreciative of your encouragement for me to be here today, and I really look forward to working in this space with the department in the future.
Yeah, I come from a beef and potato growing background, and probably what prompted me to start looking at changes was the risk. We went through a potato industry that sort of went through a lot of changes, and it had a big impact on our soil, and it was sort of getting harder and harder to make a living out of it. So I could see that by changing the soil regeneratively and building the carbon back up, producing something that consumers wanted. So really focusing on nutrient density and products that no one else could produce, and then looking at selling that directly to high-end retailers. So it's all about de-risking my operation, basically.
The question about that information flow is so critical. I think
Yeah, Dave McFall. The question about that, some of these blockages and the information, and Brendon, well presented. You're an innovator 15, 20 years ago when I first met you, and it's good to see the progression on your farm. Agronomists. There seems to be a very key group in our industry that we need to engage with in terms of the transitional pathways, in terms of the to and fro over economics, over principles of practice and things like that. So really a comment from yourself, having done the journey, some more advanced than others, the relationship of agronomists and how you think that some of that breakthrough could happen. Obviously, Brendon, you've got consultants that have guided you very, very closely in your journey. So really the agronomist, is there any agronomist in the room? So that might be one. So really, less than 1%. So really, is that the problem we've got? And how can we tackle that? Your opinions, thanks.
It's a good point, David. In the last 18 years, I think I've never paid money for agronomy, and the local agronomists that come out, you can pick them straight away. They're usually 22 or 3, easy to influence, and they start making up excuses to deliver a bag of dog biscuits 35 kilometres from town so they can sniff around and see what you're doing. They usually end up starting their own businesses and become consultants outside of the corporate world because it doesn't fit with upselling. I think that businesses like Nutrien and Elders are developing maybe a regen type arms. Whether or not they're in it for the real reasons or not, I don't know. But yeah, if that helps, the younger generation are a lot easily influenced as they get once they're set in their ways. Yeah, it's a bigger task.
Anyone else like to
Do you use agronomists, and what's your experience?
No, we don't. We use a local agronomist for herbicide recommendations at this point in time for the land that still requires that, but we don't have a paid agronomist by any means. But yeah, certainly don't utilise services to a great extent.
I should apologise. I don't pay for chemical agronomy. I pay for soils agronomy, and my consultants are based all over Australia.
I sort of find it pretty hard to find independent agronomy people who understand the regen ag space. So I mostly now try and do a lot of it myself. I do use one person to sort of do the soil sample analysis and just a little bit of nutrient quantity work, but it is a difficult thing to find.
Can I just ask Brendon, why did you go to Queensland universities? We've got our WA universities here. Why were they not good enough?
I don't know anyone in WA. I'm not as well connected as most, but the consultants that we use are based in Queensland, Melbourne, WA, but the ones in Queensland happened to be having at a wedding, happened to sit next to Professor Paul, and they started talking about what they were doing, and the professor got so excited he said, "I'm going to make this happen." So, yeah, it's not what you know, is it? It just was a off the cuff thing that happened. And look, the whole finding someone that works for you is the key, and I think I made that point. I think the idea earlier on about some sort of symposium where if you've got interested growers and they could come and listen to 4 or 5 different consultants in a day and then decide which bits they can take away from that. But I don't think there's a one size fits all. I am a hybrid grower. I don't know, but it's a work in progress, as I said.
Yeah, question for Debbie Dowden. How can you see us in the South West Land Division learning from the practices of the rangelands, which is truly clean and green, marketing opportunities and all that sort of stuff? Is there any learnings you can, because that's where we're going to fall down in our marketing side of things, and keeping our clean and green, which we truly clean and green like yours is?
Thanks, Phil. We do have a truly clean and green environment at Chalice Station and in the Southern Rangelands, and part of that is the fact that we don't till the soil, we don't put crops, and we don't apply any fertilisers or chemicals or anything like that. So perhaps it's a fairly long stretch, but I like to think that there's a lot of learnings to be had in terms of the carbon space and in terms of soil regeneration, because the Southern Rangelands have been depleted for a long time. And we are now in the place where we're really working hard to figure out how we're going to best improve our range condition, and we're quite dedicated to improving the range condition. So perhaps that's the way that we could pass on some information to other farmers in the area who are in drying conditions. The fact that we've done a lot of work with slowing our water flow, maximising the effective rainfall, utilising the correct animals for the situation, the self-herding techniques that we're using, the genetics that we've chosen for our herd. We've probably got a lot to offer drying climate areas in the fact that we've been living in this 200 millimetre rainfall area and surviving and thriving there for 20 years. And it's really nice, Phil, that you've asked that question, because it's not many people ask that about the Southern Rangelands. But we do have a lot of expertise and a lot of skills that we'd love to pass on.
Jeff, while I've got you up, what's the 1 or 2 things that the Minister must use this money for to make a difference? I'm going to ask all of you that question.
Big thing for our area, I think, that the low-hanging fruit for every pastoral property is to fix the roads. So a lot of the roads become rivers. And people come to your property and go, why do you make a road down a river? It happened the other way around. It was a road first and then it became the river. And so that's where our focus is, because that's the fast draining water goes off down our roads. So if all of the southern rangelands pastoralists focus on repairing their roads, putting in the woboys and the leaky weirs and the ponding banks and things like that to hold back that flow and keep it on your property, water your landscape, not your roads. In combination with that, if the minister could influence main roads and ask them, please don't build your roads up so high, because that stops the flow of water right across the landscape, and that's droughting thousands of acres downstream. If we could have the roads built to some way that it didn't impede the flow of water, shire roads and main roads, that would go an enormous way towards fixing the landscape. And I think that's low-hanging fruit. It's very measurable, and it's something that can be done from one pastoralist right up to the main roads level. Scalable, thank you.
Yeah, probably I would say data is my number one thing that I would ask for. I'm doing things quite differently, not using chemical fertilisers anymore. I can see things changing in the plants and the soil, but I've sort of got a blindfold on. I need X-ray vision, so I need to be able to test or analyse what is actually changing, other than the physical things that I can look at. So data is the first one. I think education. It takes a long time to get your head around this regen ag gig. But once you sort of, all of a sudden it'll start to click when all the dots will start to join, and that's probably when you start researching as much as I have. It just all of a sudden makes sense to you. The third one, it's I suppose it's measurement, which is the data. We've got to be able to measure to be able to change. So sometimes I just feel like I've got a blindfold on. It's hard to know exactly what is going on. You see the good things, but what's the science behind it?
Dean, one of the things that you've been interested in is measuring the photosynthetic efficiency of your plants, and you believe that can actually be done above ground. Is that right? With drones?
It's probably, I think there's sensing technology around spectrometry that potentially can measure that. So I think this photosynthetic efficiency is the biggest input into agriculture is not being measured at the moment. So if we go from, say, 15% efficiency, that's the amount of sun hitting the leaf and getting converted into photosynthate, if we can double that or triple that, then all of a sudden you go from a 4-cylinder to a V8, and then that excess photosynthate then starts to get deposited in the soil and just drives the whole system. So I think if we can nail that photosynthetic efficiency measurement, I think the whole thing's going to become a lot easier.
I'm going to take licence for a minute. CSIRO doing a lot of work. Satellite, whole of scope analysis of crop type by yield by Michael, you want to make a quick comment on where this is going?
Well, there are a range of low-tech and high-tech options, actually. And I guess what Dean was articulating there was a high-tech approach. So there are a range of products. It's rather exciting, actually, what's happening with the satellite remote sensing revolution at the moment. There's a whole range of products that are coming out, being delivered by digital ag startup companies, by governments, by other entities. And I think the real challenge for us in the room here is to demand the delivery of those products in locally relevant ways, and in ways in which farmers can access them to make decisions on the ground, actually. There's still a gap there between the technology that's been developed and the relevance for decision making.
I'm going to hand back. 2 or 3 things that you'd like to see the minister use this money for.
I was sort of backing what Dean's saying and sort of that data capture and measurement stuff. We are in a world now where the consumer is increasingly requiring more and more information about what's going on and what they're purchasing with their dollar. So I think we've got to be able to provide that information. So some of, like Stuart was saying, some live stream measurements in the paddock. But we've got to get some of that data very accurate, because unfortunately I think some of these carbon capture models that it was even mentioned today, the variability between the 3 or 4 different models, well, that's just not acceptable. And even when you look at enteric emissions from livestock, it's based on research really which doesn't look at animals that have got an intact microbiome in their room and that's not affected by drenches, not affected by grain feeding. So where are the outcomes from those research? So I think we've got to be really careful that we're not just fitting into a calculator that's got really skewed information. I think that's something we need to be able to go forward on.
And you're getting a lot of information in trials. You said there was, 880 sites? I couldn't quite work out where they were, but when you put the map up, what's the actual opportunity there for actually capturing?
So that project was a conjunction with the UWA, GRDC, I think, DPIRD, local grower groups, and Dr. Andrew Werrett came out and he I was involved with our local grower group at the time, and the same thing happened with about 8 or 10 other grower groups, and there might have been 10 farmers within each of those. So, and then there was, say, 8 sites on each farm. So you do the math. What did that equal? 10 times 10 times 8. So was that the national I think it was West Australia.
Yeah, so it was the soil quality program that was run through UWA and DPIRD. So there was about 1,200 sites across Western Australia.
I carry the book with me just in case anyone wants to see it. I've bored my wife to tears with this over the last couple of years, trying to get this happening again. And the only reason I'm so passionate about it is probably selfish reasons, because even within our little farming community in Kulin, my neighbour has been doing zero-till for 17 years. I've been doing what I've been. I know another couple of neighbours that are doing different things, and all these sites are GPS'd. And then you've got other grower groups in Holt Rock, Merredin, all over the place that are doing the same things in medium to low rainfall areas. I mean, the high rainfall area, please forgive me, but yeah, give me 600 mils and I'll sequester carbon. But when you get sub 200 mils, you're going downhill. So, but my passion has always been nutrition. I put myself out on Twitter as a regen grower just because I wanted to see who was there. My philosophy has been improving the soil health, and it's interesting, the journey. You can do what you like. If you'd told me 15 years ago we'd be doing what we're doing now, I thought we'd have end users falling over us to buy nutrient food and low carbon. But it just hasn't happened. As CBH alluded to, they're bulk exporters. We don't have a domestic market, so it's very difficult. In the east, our growers are delivering 14,000 tonne of grain and having it turned into certified sustainable flour at whole grain milling in Gunnedah, and they're kicking some big goals. But we don't have that in the west, and they even know that we're doing it in the west, and it's not that easy, But summing that up, you do, as someone said earlier on, I can't remember, it was Andrew, you can have all these things, you can have the nutrient density, you can have the low carbon footprint. I think what the consumer wants is for everyone to do it so they still get everything at the same price. And don't think I'm cynical there. That just seems to be the reality of the situation until someone comes to me and says, I will test your grain, Brendon. I'll take it to the factory, I'll put it up against the other grain, I'll put your livestock up against it, and we'll find out whether it's nutrient dense. That's my challenge.
Another question from the audience.
Can we just ask Guy about your wool and what's happened with your wool? Because it's the nutritional density, not just in humans, but it can affect for those that are fibre growers. So what are you finding with your wool?
Yeah, that has been a really interesting. Just when Walter was talking about that nutritional integrity. So when you've got that into the pasture base and the animals that have got the microbiome that can utilise that, just the quality of the protein formation that can be in the wool or the meat or the grain production, they're all proteins at the end of the day. Yes, we've had our wool segregated, I guess, through the international purchasers wanting to do that and running it through on its own and finding, even in the dry land conditions, wool that's able to come up with a similar quality, if not better than that grown in Tasmania in the high rainfall zones. So I can only put that down to, the way those animals are able to interact with their environment and their epigenetic changes, and as those animals, we've got a self-replacing flock. So that has been captured by those buyers, and they're wanting to source that all the time for those reasons. And also they are looking very much at your whole emissions things, but the whole story behind that as well. So there is big movements as far as the marketplace goes to putting that information out to the consumers so that they know what they're buying and what the ramifications are of that.
Take another couple of questions from the audience. We've got this time.
Great conversation, thank you. Just had a question regarding, do you use consultants? How do you find consultants that have the same value system? And if not, how do we get our consultants on board?
I have a consultant, and it just developed over 15, 17 years. We just started off in a certain space, and I think there was a few of us in WA, and people from the eastern states started coming over and having a look, and grower groups developed in the east. And I don't know, there's nearly 180 of us Australia-wide, so it does become difficult to manage with the consultants because it's such a hard angle to learn. So if you lose a consultant, it's a lot harder to train than a conventional agronomist. But we're now on the panhandle in Texas, so those guys have got a lot more money, and they might promote our system better than what we do. So. But your question's very valid. You can't just pull out the phone directory and go, I just want a consultant that's going to teach me how to do this. We had an information day last week, and it's rare to get more than a few people come along because everyone's busy doing what they're doing, and it just doesn't seem to attract a lot of interest. And we probably don't put it out there enough either, to be honest. But you can only cater for so many, and it's a difficult one.
One more. Thanks.
Hi, Davina Gossage from Dumble Young, our producer. Just thank you very much to the panellists and Stuart McAlpine, Gary Page, others in the room who are such great, leaders in the industry. Thank you for that. I know it hasn't been an easy road, but we really, look towards you for the future. My question, one of the limiting factors I've found is banks, and just wondering your support level, or perhaps not so much support from your banks when you're looking at going sustainable, regenerative, alternate, and any take-home messages from that.
We've been very fortunate, and it's interesting seeing Andrew here today, but we've been long-term customers of NAB, and they've been very supportive all the way along. We've pushed envelopes many a time, but we've had great support from them. So I don't think it's been a real issue. I don't know if the conversation has come up a lot. It's just a matter of doing your business and having a plan that makes sense, I guess.
Yeah, we're just looking at changing banks, and the new prospective chap came out last week, and I think what he liked was the lower risk profile that we now are looking at. So he was really encouraging, and he really liked what we're doing from a risk perspective.
I'd like to reinforce what Ryan said. Our banks have always backed us, and they like the fact that we're not using massive rates of synthetics, because in the event of a frost or a dry finish, it's belly up. So if we're being more conservative, sure, we might miss out on the last little bit of yield, but at the end of the day, if things go wrong, we're still still profitable rather than, you know, have our backs against the wall. We did change from a Rabo to rural only because I'm very involved in the local community and I've neglected to support them for 20 years, so there was a bit of community pressure. And the bank manager, he had been magnificent. So, yeah, no issues at all with financing.
What our bank manager also liked was the fact that we were decoupling from commodity markets. So he liked the fact that we'd be going to get us a consistent, probably above average return in the future. And he could see the sense in that.
And banks have shied away from the southern rangelands for a fair while. However, now that we've got our carbon projects and they're a reality, then the banking is starting to return back to the area. So that's happy days for us.
Is there one last question?
Richard Hudson from the Country Hour, and I've worked for the ABC for about 20 years, and this is probably be the first question I've asked in a public forum, so apologies, but I'm recording now and I'm lazy, so I thought I'd just do it all in one. Deb Dowden from Challa, I believe your carbon project is now actually starting to pay off and return, and just wonder if you could expand on the flow-on effects that's had for your community.
So one of the things that I worry about is that not every pastoralist is eligible for a carbon project. So I'm concerned that there's going to be the haves and the have-nots in amongst the pastoral industry. Hopefully over time we can begin to draw in more people into the carbon projects. For our business, it's taken the pressure off. It means that we no longer have to work off property to bring in an income to support our habit of pastoralism. So, and we're also able to, justify spending money on revitalising the rangelands or regenerative approaches or ponding banks and all those things that you didn't have the money for previously. It's also really given the community a shot in the arm. It's been marvellous the way that the whole area has turned around and the whole way of thinking has turned around, and now the southern rangelands is actually quite an attractive place to live, whereas 5 years ago you couldn't give away your station. These days, there's a lot of interest in the southern rangelands. The economy's booming. We're actually putting in an estimate $100 million a year into the state economy through carbon projects. Now that's worth looking at, and it's worth paying attention to, and it's sort of gives us a seat at the table now. So it's made a massive difference on many different levels, and I hope that the people who don't have carbon projects yet are able to jump on board and also participate.
Okay, all right, guys. Well, look, thank you so much. I mean, this is what I love about ag. Every day you just learn so much, and my head is just bursting with all of the things that we've learned today. And in particular, a big thanks to Walter for coming over. Walter, I mean, I know you have such a depth of knowledge. It is something we are going to continue to plumb, because you're really understanding this thing at its very, very deepest level. And I think we've got to understand that big picture, and for me in particular to really get a real understanding of the complexity of our farming systems and the value of livestock in those farming systems, and how we can strongly make this case. Now, I think Tony York, the good Tony, he's sort of like run off after having made his statement. I think Tony was implying that I'd probably used a bit of a Trojan horse here. I told everyone, come in, we're going to be talking about carbon, and I snuck in that bloody, regenerative agriculture. And why did I do that? But look, I do think this is about climate resilience, and I'll be very clear that we need all of these tools about carbon accounting, but I don't think that the jury is really out that we need to develop the biological system in our soil, which is, I think, at the heart of this discussion if we are going to deal with climate change, if we're going to deal with the localised effects, if we're going to deal with those globalised effects. So the only way that we can do this, I mean, we can do, there'll be a lot of smart add-ons and smart assisting, and we'll put hydrogen in your tractors and whatever, and we'll do a bit that way. But without really dealing with this issue of investing in the natural capital. And I really, as Justin from Regen Ag was saying today, well, maybe what we need to do is we need to move away from talking about regen, because it gets people all, agitated and thinking about, what is the precise definition. And what we've got to focus on is this idea of natural capital, that we've got the soil, it's our natural capital. How do we develop that? How do we make that live and work? How do we add to that? And without protecting that, enhancing that, we're not going to deal with climate change. But I want us to be out there as an agricultural community, really being in the spotlight for being the good guys in this whole argument. And I think we can do it. Look, I've the feedback, quite clear. It is we need to do so much research on so many different areas, but I don't think that should hold us back from making progress. I think these things can go hand in hand. I mean, it's been fantastic, and we've discovered 2 sets of lost data, shall we say, today. Peter Reynolds, Peter is talking about a whole repository of information that's somewhere around there in the bowels of DPIRD on soil carbon data between 2010 and 2015 in the rangelands. Got to dig that out. And Brendon, of course, told us about this fantastic 2008 study, which just has so many sites where we have actually done incredible recording of biological analysis, chemical analysis, carbon content of the soil. Now this is an amazing resource. If we take this opportunity to then go and now re-look at those sites and then have a look at what has been the farming practice that has gone on in each of those sites. We have the most extraordinary laboratory, that we can utilise to show that there are these, this is what will be the result of different farming systems that are utilised. So we, I think it's very exciting. I think I was very appreciative of that. A number of grower groups have been saying, yeah, we want someone to come out, work with us in our groups, and then provide further assistance for people to have individual mentors and people that really understand this area to go out and work on their particular farms. So we're going to look at how we get that and get that underway as quickly as possible, and without it being too bureaucratically complex. I think a number of people have talked about education. I actually really do think that is critically important, and that we need to get the universities, and I think we've got representatives of all 3 universities here. We've got to try to get the universities in Western Australia working as a team together on this, and we need to work with them to assist on these sorts of projects, and to make sure that Regen Ag is actually part of what, or shall I say, sorry, take back Regen, natural capital accounting is very much part of the training. But I also wouldn't just put it at universities. One of the things that, having gone out to all these ag schools and seeing these kids sort of come up around you, and they're obviously repeating what their dads have said to them, that I think it is a really a great opportunity. We're working with Muresk here to bring all the Year 11 and 12s from the 5 ag colleges here and to run a weekend-long program on Regen Ag, because these are the kids that are out there, you know, working with their parents. And I've seen firsthand from Darcy, put your hand up, in my office, how he's converted his father, a farmer from Redmond, who's now really thinking deeply about this sort of stuff. So we've had, and I think we need more support. I thank you so much for all of the people that have contributed today, but I'm really interested in, I-Lyn, how we can use our capacity, our trade capacity in the department, you know, now to try to sort of focus on how do we build the market, you know, us actually actively going out there and helping build that market. So I'll be having some discussions with Ralph and Carl and others about how we can move on that front. So what's clear is there's plenty of ideas, there's plenty of opportunities for us to do this. Sorry, those people that were saying more about soil carbon measurement, we are doing that with the Land Restoration Fund. That will be very much a part of what we can do, particularly that bit that we're going to do in those 350 millimetre and less rainfall areas, how we can get that methodology right, and how we can really use that as a laboratory, because part of getting ready to do the carbon farming will be the gathering of great data, and so we can provide assistance in doing that work and getting farmers on board. So I do want to thank the people in the department that have worked very hard getting this up. Corinne Blenkinsop, Corinne, thank you. David Ferris, Alison Lacey, Cameron Diss, and Nancy Ganaway. And I also want to thank Darcy Duncan from our office, because I know he's lived and breathed this for the last month. So, but to all of you, thank you so much for coming along today, participating, and I will promise you that we in the department are going to be working very, very hard to make something real come out of this. Thank you all very much and good luck.